I'm Juliette Foster, coming to you from Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, a global initiative championed by the UAE and backed by the clean energy powerhouse Masdar. All week we'll be bringing you the latest news and interviews with the major players, plus analysis of the day's developments. On today's ADSW Live, we're focusing on pathways to net zero and especially the need for a whole society, whole planet approach to delivering a clean energy transition. A quick look at where we are right now before we bring in our first guest.
Since the start of time, each new energy revolution has impacted us all. Fire introduced energy-rich food and boosted human evolution. Agriculture led to human settlement, towns, and then cities. Fossil fuels ushered in massive growth, but also unimagined environmental damage. Today, as we plot our urgent shift from fossil fuels to renewable energies, we know the energy transition can only succeed if it includes all of us. North and South, East and West have and have not communities developing and developed economies, the major CO2 emitters, and the communities with the smallest carbon footprint. Everyone must have a seat at the table. As the UAE's Special Envoy for Climate Change announced at last year's ADSW, our goal is to hold back emissions, not to hold back progress or economic development. An inclusive green energy transition will require engagement, expertise, and funding across the energy spectrum: solar, wind, hydro, and clean hydrocarbons. An ambition backed by investment from Masdar, a key enabler of the UAE's vision to drive clean energy growth, accelerate an equitable energy transition, and to be at the forefront to solve the climate challenges. To deliver the energy transition we all urgently need, to share in the environmental, social, and economic benefits that will follow, we must all be included. All sectors, all industries, everyone around the world.
The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, was drafted 30 years ago, back in 1992. Since its first day, it has championed an inclusive approach to tackling climate change. Well, our next guest is Nigel Topping. He's the UK's high-level climate champion, and he now joins us. Nigel, it's good to see you. Thank you for taking the time out to be here. So how does it feel to be a climate champion? What does it mean to you personally?
Well, I mean, it's a huge honour, first of all, to be appointed by the president of the COP. So I was appointed by the UK Prime Minister when the UK took on COP26 presidency. And I've just stepped down after 2 COPs. So it's a huge honour, and it's an amazing job, right? Because the mandate is to work with everybody who's not a national government, which means businesses, large and small, banks, investors, cities, universities, to drive ambition and to really focus on action. I'm quite pushy, and my background's in business, so it's nice to have a mandate which is just
guessed you were pushy.
To push people. so it's great, and we made a lot of progress in the last few years of really raising ambition and getting much more specific about the actions that people need to take.
But it sounds like you're a connector, bringing together people who perhaps in other circumstances wouldn't link up, but you're the glue, you're the one who holds them together, and above all, make sure that the conversations continue even when you leave the role. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, connecting is really important. I mean, we talk a lot about radical collaboration, about getting people who maybe wouldn't normally talk together, but this is about a systemic change in the global economy. So if we don't collaborate, we're going to do it too slowly. And yeah, in terms of making sure it carries on, that's one of the reasons why the UN decided there would always be 2 champions, so there's always an overlap. So I worked with Gonzalo Munoz from Chile, the COP25 champion, and then Dr. Mahmoud Mohidin from Egypt, the COP27 champion. And we've built a team to support future champions, which is already working to support the new Emirati champion, Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak, who's a great choice, by the way.
Fantastic. Now look, earlier you talked about the COP26 in Glasgow. What do you think has changed since then? You talked about collaboration. Are we seeing more of that since that time?
So I think a lot of things have changed. One thing is that basically we've all agreed, I mean, not everybody, but way past a sort of tipping point majority, that we've got to get to net zero as quickly as possible. So that's one thing that's changed. Second of all, private finance is in the room in a big way. You know, we co-founded with Mark Carney the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero. That's over 500 banks, asset owners, asset managers, insurers.
Just to clarify, Mark Carney is a former governor of the Bank of England.
Yeah, former governor of the Bank of England, and was a special envoy to the Secretary General of the United Nations and the advisor to the UK Prime Minister. And so we worked together to create this big group, all of whom committed to put in place plans to finance to net zero. And so since Glasgow, when the big headline of 130 trillion, but that's just assets under management, all those organisations have been putting in place plans to decarbonise their loan books or their pension portfolios, which they're now implementing. That's a massive shift of capital. I think the other thing that's happened is we've got very clear architecture of implementation, what we call the Breakthrough Agenda, which was launched in Glasgow, and then the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda launched in Sharm el-Sheikh. So we know what we've got to do by 2030. And so the really exciting thing for me now about this UAE presidency is to really operationalize that at scale, and with many more people who maybe haven't always been involved in the climate conversation, but are ministers of energy or industry, not of environment, because it's those ministers who have to make the policy changes and work with the private sector to drive the investment.
But it seems that more people are coming around the table, which is a really positive thing. And you mentioned there the COP28 happening later this year, of course, in Dubai. But what would you say that we need to be doing differently compared to previous COPs? Because you are a bit of a COP veteran, so you've got that insider's view.
Well, I think first thing is to respectfully do the homework to know what's happened before and build on it. And I'm really encouraged for everything I've seen. The Emiratis have put together a great team, and they have been doing their homework and bring that kind of humility to recognise the complexity and build on it. So that, I think that's already a tick. But secondly, I would say give people their swim lanes early. So define the thematic days in the next few weeks. By the end of February, say, because we're talking about trying to mobilise line ministers and CEOs who have the most jam-packed diaries of any human beings in the world. Give them their swim lanes, tell them which 2 or 3 days you want them to turn up, and tell them what you want to turn up with. Don't tell them that you don't want them to turn up to tell everybody else what to do, but turn up saying what you're doing, what money you're putting on the table, what projects you've already done, what projects you're committing to, and set a high bar for ambition and mobilise everybody. That architecture's emerging, but I think it could be really cemented this year.
Yeah, because this is always the problem, isn't it? That COPs tend to overrun. Everybody bites their nails down, but we need to keep it on track to deliver. Well,
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I would distinguish between the multilateral negotiations, which is formally what the COP is, and it's a negotiation. Negotiations always overrun. That's part of the dynamics of negotiations, right? You have the one-upmanship till midnight, and then you go over a little bit. So they never finish on time, a day or two late. So that's okay. It's normal dynamics. But what I'm talking about is what happens outside of those formal negotiations, which is less. The negotiations require 196 countries to agree every comma. It's a very high bar of consensus. In the real economy, you don't have to get everyone to agree. You have to get a government, a financier, and a lead implementer to agree, and then amazing stuff happens. So that sort of dynamic implementation track is also very present at the COPs, and actually hasn't tended to get as much coverage as the negotiations. And I think that we will see the world pay more attention. There's still some important things to be negotiated, but you shouldn't be under the illusion that that's where all of the interesting stuff is happening, because a lot of the interesting stuff is happening alongside the negotiations.
Absolutely, and it continues when everything's actually folded up. But Nigel, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure speaking to you. I know that you've got a very busy schedule ahead of you, so I will let you go. But that was Nigel Topping. He is the UK's high-level climate champion, and a very good champion he is too. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant. We need look no further than Abu Dhabi's national energy company, TAQA, for an example of how industry and infrastructure are collaborating to help deliver a clean energy transition. Well, Omar AlHashmi is the executive director of TAQA's transmission and distribution business, and he's perfectly placed to explain how that collaboration works both in principle and in practice. Omar, thank you so much for being here. It's good to see you. Look, can you just start with a short explanation of what transmission and distribution actually means and how you apply it at TAQA?
Okay, so thank you very much. First of all, it's really great to be here. especially with the caliber that we have in this week in Abu Dhabi. Again, my name is Omar AlHashmi. I'm responsible for the transmission distribution, which is one of the three main pillars in TAQA, together with oil and gas and generation. Today, TAQA is one of the largest integrated utility companies in the Middle East, Europe and Africa. We're kind of like number 10 by regulated asset base. So from transmission distribution business line, what we're referring to is all the assets from the moment the power watt is generated all the way to the consumer, including the servicing them by billing and collection and the customer service part. So that's the part that we're focusing on.
Okay, so thank you for that. Now, given what you've just said, why is infrastructure so important in delivering the energy transition? We're talking about energy transition, but we now have to make it happen. So where does infrastructure fit into that transition equation?
I'm really glad we're actually talking about that. I mean, traditionally the media has been focusing so much on the generation, like is that energy coming from hydrogen, from solar, from wind, and to a certain extent on how we consume the energy, like, you know, there might be an LED technology that consumes less, or a certain equipment that's actually more efficient in using it. And everybody always assumed that the infrastructure is there to deliver it. But reality is, infrastructure is not there to deliver it, and there's a lot of bottlenecks in the system. So, I mean, depending on different data sources, I mean, we believe that the world needs between 15 to 30 trillion dollars of investments in the transmission and distribution up to 2050 to enable all that energy and green electrons to flow. There's few trends causing that massive investments. From one side, we need to be able to connect all these new generation assets to the grid. Yeah, so that's one major trend we see. We also noticed that, for example, I mean, electricity as a market is gaining momentum and gaining space. Like, for example, today in Africa, 40% of the population is connected, but there's very strong ambition for that percentage to grow significantly. So basically the market of electricity is actually growing. There's also the notion that many parts of the grids in different parts of the world are very old and requires major investments and refurbishments and replacements to allow it to be catered to deal with all these different changes in the energy mix. And there's the reality of electric vehicles and batteries. So reality is, there is so much investments needed, and people assume it's just there and it's already there. But if we don't really take care of it, we're going to have an issue. And we think that investments in transmission distribution is as important as it is in the generation side. So.
My sense of what you've just said is that what you're talking about here is changing our perception of what that infrastructure is all about, effectively redefining it, redefined by reality.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, again, when you think about renewable energies, the nature of the electrons is different. There is intermittency. Sometimes the sun is on, sometimes the sun is off. There's a lot of technological requirements to enable us to fully maximize the value of the renewables. And the technologies of the past needs to be upgraded to allow us to do that, basically.
Given that, how is TAQA's transmission and distribution business prepared to invest in infrastructure? Because the layout on this is phenomenal.
Absolutely. I mean, if we refer to some of our announcements about our ambition to invest, actually we made we talked about how much we need to invest. I mean, in the transmission distribution side, we see that that we need in our territory is about more than $10 billion investments just to be able to keep up with all these trends. And here you're talking about a city that is fairly well developed and built up, but you still need that big investment. And if you look at other parts of the world, the investments are going to be much bigger. I do see it every year. There's an increase in requirements from a CapEx point of view. These are projects to meet our customers' needs and their natural growth, but also to connect with all the ambitious projects that UAE is doing to bring more electrons, like, you know, connecting the nuclear power plants, connecting the new PV plants. And we believe that we are an important stakeholder and partner to support UAE and Abu Dhabi to meet its objectives.
But also as well, very briefly, we've been talking or referencing demand-side management, DSM. Now, it's seen as a key part of decarbonising the energy sector. So, in very simple terms, what is DSM? Why is it so important to that decarbonisation process? And more specifically, what is TAQA doing within that space?
That's a very good question. Thank you so much. So DSM is basically a notion of how we can consume smarter, right? It has many different pillars associated with it. Some elements might be about better awareness. Like sometimes if you just know that you don't need to keep the heater on the whole day, if you only need to take a shower once a day, that reduces your consumption. If you know that if you keep the fridge a little bit open, it increases consumption. So part of it is just knowing the proper way to consume the power without really affecting your lifestyle. So that's one big important part of DSM. But also retrofit is a very big agenda for us. Reality is, the governments, they're doing a lot of effort to try to improve the codes of building. Now you see the new buildings are built in a much more efficient way, and insulation and all that kind of stuff. But reality is, a lot of our cities have been built a long time ago. So although a lot of these regulations support the new building, we need to have solution for the older building. So retrofitting becomes a major item from demand-side management program, where we see a lot of promises of deploying technology in a very smart way to actually provide savings to the consumer and to the environment. So what does TAQA is doing about that? We're doing quite a bit, actually. We created a company called ADS, Abu Dhabi Energy Services, which acts like a super ESCO or a market maker for the energy services market. So what they do is they try to develop projects, and they create a tender in the market, and they provide financing solution, because some of these deals are non-financeable from a traditional banking point of view. So we provide that platform that allows that business to happen. Demand-side management is very good from an economic point of view. It creates jobs, it reduces cost, it employs people. So it's actually a very good thing that you can do, where it's actually a win-win-win to everybody.
Okay, good note on which to end. But Omar, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. But that was Omar AlHashmi, who's the Executive Director of TAQA's Transmission and Distribution Business. Presidents, prime ministers, business leaders and policymakers were amongst the attendees for the opening ceremony of ADSW on Monday. Launched in 2008, ADSW is committed to accelerating the world's sustainable development. This year's event was opened by Dr. Sultan Ahmed Al-Jubair, the UAE's Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology, and the newly named chairman of COP28.
This year's ADSW carries a special significance, because it is the year that we host COP28 in a critical decade for climate progress.
The Zayed Sustainability Prize Awards also took place today. 10 winners have been announced in 5 categories. We'll be talking to some of the winners later this week. And in climate industry news, the US government and Masdar have signed a deal for Masdar to develop 15 gigawatts of clean energy in the US by 2035. The $20 billion project is the first phase of PACE, that is the Partnership for Accelerating Clean Energy. Internationally, the UAE is supporting and implementing clean energy projects on 6 continents. That's all we have time for. Stay with us. We'll be back after this short break.